veil here. Okay. So without further ado, John, go ahead.
Thank you. Nobody's a model for justice at 82 years old, I can assure you, but I'll do my best. It is with profound gratitude that we welcome the Reverend Dr. Mitri Raheb back to Southern Arizona, even if it is by Zoom, Mitri. Mitri came to Tucson and the borderlands in March in person, and he spoke to us during the All Walls Must Fall conference about the reality of the wall between Palestine and Israel and the Israeli occupation. Today, Mitri has graciously agreed to speak with us about faith in the face of empire, the Bible through Palestinian eyes. Dr. Raheb is born in Bethlehem and at the age of 5 began his experience of life under Israeli occupation. He is currently the founder and president of Dar al-Kalima University College in Bethlehem. He has served as president of the Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land. He served as senior pastor of the Evangelical Lutheran Christian Church in Bethlehem, Palestine. He is the author of several books, Bethlehem Besieged, I Am a Palestinian Christian. He co-authored The Cross in Context, Suffering and Redemption in Palestine. The Reverend Dr. Mitri Raheb, we are profoundly grateful and look forward to your sharing again with us your wisdom, your experience, and your faith. Faith in the face of empire. Dr. Raheb.
Yeah, thank you, Muhyiddin, for the invitation, and thank you, John, for this introduction. Thank you, Christine, also for the words that you said and that you are going to monitor the discussion later. I understood from Christine now that you read the book, everyone. Is this assumption I can make that everyone read the book? Okay.
No, I haven't read the book.
Okay, so not everyone. So
yeah, I haven't read the book either, but I'll look forward to it.
Okay, great. So I will see how then to navigate this. Anyhow, it was really a great experience for me to be with you in Tucson, Arizona in March, as John said. And I came actually together with my friend and colleague Miguel de la Torre. Some of you might know him, a Latin American theologian. And actually he's here right now with us in Bethlehem because he took me to see the wall on the Mexican border, and I wanted him to see the wall here because we are writing together a book about walls, and we hope that this book will come out end of next year. So you see, I mean, this is a continuation basically of what we had in Arizona. Now, my book, Faith in the Face of Empire, came 8 years ago. It is, I would consider it one of my best books that I have written, because in this book, I tried to introduce, I would say, a genuine Palestinian perspective on the Bible. Why is that important? Because I believe that what happened in 1948, what we call the Nakba, the catastrophe, is not only that we as Palestinians lost the land, 77% of it, that over 520 villages were destroyed. But I think even more so, we lost our narrative. So Israel did not only confiscate our land, they confiscated our narrative. And they weaponized the Bible for that. How they did that was that they took the biblical story of conquest of Joshua as their model in Conquest 1948. And they actually thought, not out of belief, but out of marketing, that actually the Bible could be how they will market this conquest, not as a settler colonial project, but rather than as a fulfillment of prophecy, or as a recreation of the conquest under Joshua. And this is why Ben-Gurion in the 50s, the most important book he was reading was Joshua. And in fact, he had a statue of Joshua being done, and he has that on his desk always, because for him, Joshua was the model to follow. Taking the land, exterminating the people, ethnic cleansing basically, but all as actually using the blueprint of the Joshua story. And we became, in this narrative, either the aliens or the Amalekites or the Philistines that actually God gave the Israelites a very clear command to exterminate the people. So suddenly this biblical story became actually a strategy for the war in 48 and after that. And this ideology, the Zionist ideology based on the Bible, but actually developed by secular Jews. These Jewish generals and politicians and archaeologists and religious figures were not necessarily, I mean, forget about the religious figures, but all others were not necessarily believing Jews. But I mean, there is, the joke that most of the Jews do not believe in God, but they believe that God gave them the land. That was exactly the narrative that they were promoting. And they thought, successfully so, unfortunately, that the evangelical Christians who buy into this story as history are their partners in this endeavor. And so suddenly, as I said, we either became the Philistines or we became the aliens. I had once an old American lady visiting me, and she said, Pastor, I don't understand the Israeli. I thought God told them in the Old Testament to be nice to the strangers among their midst. I said, I don't like that, because we are not the strangers. If there is anybody, the Israeli are the strangers, and we have no problem to be nice to them. But I refuse to be the stranger in the story. But that was the narrative, I think, that is in the mind of an average American Christian, I would say, even if they are not evangelical. Because when you read the biblical story and you hear the word Israel, immediately you think somehow that has to do with the state of Israel. And I think when the Israeli decided to call their new establishment Israel using a biblical term, I think they did it with this marketing perspective in their mind, because they wanted actually the Western world to believe that what is happening here is by divine providence and not a settler colonial project. So that's the background actually for the book. And so the question becomes then, how can we read the Bible through Palestinian eyes? And this is what I tried to do in this book. And there are few observations I would like to make. First of all, the Bible actually did not originate in the Bible Belt. Thanks God, right? So the Bible is a product of Palestine. And interestingly enough, as a Christian Palestinian, the Bible for me is a religious book. But as a Palestinian, the Bible tells part of my story and my history. Because, you know, it really, most of the stories take place in Palestine. So this book somehow is related to me as Palestinian more than, you know, to Netanyahu, who came from Eastern Europe. The second observation is that to understand the Bible, we should not start with heaven and God, but we start on earth. And for me, and I think this is the first attempt ever to take geopolitics as the hermeneutical key to understanding the Bible, the geopolitics. Never done before, according to my knowledge. What do I mean with geopolitics? If you look at Palestine on the map, you would think that Palestine is the navel of the earth. It's the center of the earth. And, you know, we have a church in Jerusalem called the navel of the earth. But this is actually religious imagination. Geopolitics, Palestine is a land on the periphery. It's a land on the margin. Why? Because Palestine, historically speaking, if we look at the last 3,000 years of history, Palestine is a small country between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean that is surrounded all the time by 5 regional powers. And these regional powers, they alternate the control of Palestine. Sometimes one empire takes all of Palestine, sometimes 2 empires, they share Palestine. And the people of Palestine, for most of the time, were unfortunately under foreign occupation. So these 5 regional powers are, if we start in the southwest, you have Egypt. Egypt was always a major power and was one of the first empires to emerge in the region. And they controlled several times Palestine. If we go a bit more to the north, you have Europe. These are the Greek, the Romans, the Crusaders. And I see Israel as part of that, because Israel is, if you want, a neo-settler colonial European project at the end of the day, now powered with American power. Then if we move a bit more to the west, you have Turkey. These are the Hittites who at some point control the land. Today, they are still a major power in the region. They have a say in what's happening. And then you have Mesopotamia, which is Syria and Iraq. Right now, they are very weak, but if you think of the Assyrians, the Babylonians, but until maybe the mid of 20th century, these were important regional powers. And then you have the Persian, Iran, which again, at certain times controlled what's happening in Palestine. And so the native people of Palestine, found themselves most of the time being under occupation by one of these empires when they were empires. And the empire and living under imperial rule, today we will say colonial rule, is very much connected to theology. Why? In fact, if we look at the oldest sections of the Bible, certain sections that were written in the 10th century before Christ. So these are the oldest section in the Bible go to that time. It is exactly that time that the first empire, the Assyrian Empire, emerged as empire. Before that, we didn't have empires in the region. So the first real empire was the Assyrian Empire. And I think it's by no chance that the oldest sections in the Bible go to that time. Why? Because the empire, actually, the empire what's the English word? The empire, provoke the question about God. Why? Because the empire behaves like God. They are omnipotent. They have all the military means. They have the economical means. They have the media, the narrative. They control all of that. And as somebody who is occupied by an empire, you ask yourself all the time, God, where are you? That question, God, where are you, actually is provoked by the empire. So, and this question is still with us as Palestinians. Sometimes when I go through the checkpoint and I see a Palestinian old woman being humiliated by an Israeli soldiers, suddenly I see this woman looking up into the heavens with open arms like this, and asking God in Arabic, Wainak ya Allah? God, where are you? Because the empire thinks they are God. I mean, if you look at the United States, what they can do and not do, I mean, who can stop them? You think they are God. And so if you are oppressed by an empire and you have faith, you don't ask the question, and this is in the Bible, interestingly, it's not where is God, but God, where are you? It's struggling with God. Why, God is really not coming to help his people. And I think the genius of our forefathers was that they were able to depict God at places that nobody thought that God will be there. Because it's easy to see God in the victory, but how can you see God when you are actually defeated? But the genius of our forefathers was actually, and this is the story of the Bible, is that they were able to depict God where nobody thought God could be there. So when Jerusalem was destroyed, was in ashes, and people thought it's over, suddenly people were able to see God in the ashes. And this is why the New Testament story could not end in any other place but on the cross, when Jesus on the cross, actually sharing the fate of the people of Palestine, asking the question, my God, why did you forsake me? As somebody who was crushed by the power of the empire. And this is genius. Why? Because at the end it means whatever the empire does, it will never celebrate victory. And this is where you see actually how the people of Palestine, all the time, when you thought they were defeated, everything is destroyed, they will rise again. And this is the story of resurrection. You know, I'm not sure if you followed this last week, the assassination of the journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, a Palestinian Christian. And she's not the only journalist, by the way. As you know, over 50 journalists were killed in Israel in the since the first Intifada. And, you know, it was a moment of agony and of suffering and of pain. And everyone was moved by what happened, because she was an icon of a Palestinian woman whose mission in life was to tell the story of the hopes and fears of all the years of the Palestinian people. And suddenly that voice was silenced. And, you know, you would think, okay, it's over. The story is silenced. But what happened actually is exactly what happened in the resurrection story, is that when you think it's over, that story is silenced. You have thousands and 10,000s of people from Jenin to Ramallah, to Jerusalem, to Bethlehem, actually going on the streets in a way that nobody thought that the Palestinians will be able to get so many people on the streets, more people actually than when Arafat died. And that is the story of Palestine. That is the story of Jesus in the New Testament. But that's the story in the Old Testament of the people, the Israelites who were facing all of these empires. And so if you start reading it this way, you know actually that the Palestinians of today are the Israelites of the Bible, and Israel of today is the empire, the colonizers in Palestine. Once you start reading the Bible through this lens, then things start to make sense. You don't buy into this, Zionist narrative that has confiscated the Bible to whitewash settler colonialism to look as something divine. And this is why I think this reading is important. And it's not only a Palestinian reading, in fact. I think this is the reading of any nation that is occupied. It's reading the Bible through these eyes. And so the question is the Bible a text of colonization, or is the Bible a text of liberation? It depends where you stand. If you are part of the empire, you will read it as part of colonization. And this is unfortunately how the Bible was misused, was weaponized in North America against First Nation, against the Native Americans, how it was weaponized in Australia against the Aboriginals, how it was weaponized in South Africa against the Black, if you are part of the empire. If you are part of the oppressed people, you know that the Bible originally was meant to be text of liberation, not text of colonization. And so reading the Bible through Palestinian eyes, meaning liberating the Bible from the imperial hands, taking it to read it in its original context as text of liberation. And let me give you another observation or, just example and then I think I might stop. During the first Intifada, a big number of the Palestinian people were in Israeli prisons. From 1967 until today, there were 700,000 Palestinians in Israeli prison, 700,000. We are a nation of 5 million here, which means every family had somebody in the course of these years in prison. And so in the first Intifada, I was the pastor, many of my parishioners, church elders, youth were in Israeli prison, and that prison was in the Negev desert. At that time, there were like 3,000 Palestinians living in this prison under what they call administrative detention, which means there was no case, no trial against them, mainly because they are politically active. So one of our youth members, his name was George. He was 19 years old. He was put in that prison for 3 years. Every 6 months, they will prolong his detention. And he was an active member in our church youth group. And I wasn't able to visit him. I was not allowed. Only one time I was allowed when he was moved to another prison. But as long as he was in that prison, I was not allowed to visit him. And as an active member in the youth work, he was thinking of us like we were thinking of him and praying for him. And so George wanted to write us a letter. But letters were not allowed to go out of that prison. No letters were allowed. And so the Palestinian prisoners has to think creatively, how can they get letters out of that prison to their family members, etc. And they find a very interesting way. I cannot tell you all the details because it's not nice details. But basically, they were writing their letters on the cigarettes that they were getting, cigarette papers. So every prisoner was getting 2 cigarettes a day, and they will take part of that very thin paper. They write a letter on it, and then they seal it in the cellophane of the cigarette pocket. And then whoever is leaving is released. He has, to swallow 10, 20, 30 of these capsules, sealed capsules. And this is how they were able to get it out. And I will not tell you how they will get out of his stomach, you can imagine. And so we used to receive every now and then one of these letters. They are that big, okay, from George. And it dawned on me actually that many of the letters that Paul wrote in the New Testament were written in prison. The book of Revelation the last book in the Bible, was written by somebody who was expelled by the empire to an island, Patmos, and it was, very difficult to get letters out. So I started reading these letters of Paul and the book of Revelation through this experience and lens of George. Actually, it was so difficult to get these letters out. And so they mean so much for the people that they received them. But what was interesting, we were worried about George, but in all the letters that George wrote to us, he never showed, any, like, he didn't want to share with us his pain, but he was all the time encouraging us to continue with the youth work. And so these letters were infused with hope. And I started understanding why the letters of Paul coming out of the prison are infused with hope, because through the lens of George, I was able to understand these letters in the New Testament in a new way that no professor in the United States or in Germany or whatever was able to read it this way, because they did not go through this experience. The Archbishop Oscar Romero in Latin America, one of the main figures.
Here's what I found.
Oh, this is Siri listening. He said once, there are many things that can only be seen through eyes that have cried. There are many things that can only be seen through eyes that have cried. The eyes of the Palestinians have been crying for so long. This is why often we say, how long, O Lord? How long, O Lord? And this is why if you read the Bible through eyes that have cried, you start understanding, I think, that the heart of the Bible that you cannot understand if you read it through the lens of the empire. So I will stop here, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. It was great. And you did touch on a lot of the salient points of your book, although there are many more in it. So people who have read it, we could ask questions about those as well. And then I'm going to be monitoring the chat as well. So if for any reason you don't have the ability to use your microphone, you can put your questions in the chat, and then I'll make sure that they get raised forward. Okay, for anyone who's having difficulty with that.
Okay, John, do you want to comment? Or the idea was for John to lead the discussion, if you will, or if you want, or we can just have it freestyle here.
Yeah, sure.
But
So
we can
anyone who
give
has
it
a
the-
burning
the
question, we
first
could
comment.
begin with the burning questions, just so that we don't go over too much more time. I think we should get just right to discussion. So if anyone has a question, you can raise your hand, and then I don't see anyone immediately doing that, so maybe just speak up. Thomas.
Yeah, thank you very much for that presentation. I have a question. Something I didn't quite catch in my notes. You made a comment that if you look at the true situation in Palestine, the Israelis are the colonizers or the empire, and the Palestinians are the oppressed people. But you used a different term for the Palestinians. I think you called them, I don't remember exactly what you called them. I'm wondering if you can recall that. The Palestinians are?
The occupied, the native people.
Okay.
Something like that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate your sharing this time with us.
Let me start with a question. John, I have two questions. The first one, which I think you touched upon, is related to the Zionist claim. Their claim to Palestine is based on the theory, if you will, that they are the Israelites of the Bible.
Yeah.
And their claim is, stands for 3,000 years, and that there is a direct relationship between the Israelites of the Bible and the Israelites of today. Some theologians, or many actually, the Catholic bishops, some from the Presbyterian Church, and many theologians confirm that there is no direct relationship between the Israelites of the Bible and the Israelites or the Israelis of today. So what you referred actually to that the Palestinians are the Israelites of the Bible, not the other way around. So I'd like to hear your comments about that. The second question is, in your book, you present Hamas as mainly concerned about religion. And that is, they want the people to have faith and worship and stuff, and that's how they, I see them as actually just like any other political party that is the Muslim Brotherhood, historically was strongest in Egypt, but in other parts of the Arab world and internationally, is a political party that uses religion. So do you have an update about your views regarding the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas?
Yeah, thank you, Muhyiddin. So regarding the first question, I'm not saying that the Palestinians today are the Israelites of the Bible, but the Palestinians today share a similar context like the Israelites of the Bible, being people under imperial occupation or colonial occupation. So it's the power balance that I'm interested in rather than genealogy. For me, the Palestinians are the descendants of all the civilizations that came into Palestine. So we are the descendants of the Israelites and of the Philistines and of the Canaanites and of the Greek, of the Arabs. And this is why Palestine is so diverse. I mean, we have Afro-Palestinians who came in the 19th century, but today they are part of Palestine, Palestinians. We have people who came from Central Asia. Their names still are from there, but they are Palestinians, fully Palestinians.
The Armenians.
Armenians, we have, people, we have Jews who are Palestinians. And, Jews were always part of Palestine. It's the Zionists that tried actually to tell a different story. So we had Christians, we had Muslims, we had different sects in Islam, different sects in Christianity. So this pluralistic, almost a tapestry, is what Palestine is. And I think we should not go like some people would go and say, we are the Canaanites. Yeah, we are the descendants of the Canaanites, but we are not the Canaanites. We are not the Israelites. We are not that. We are really the outcome of all of that. It's a dynamic identity that, and I think what is genius with the Palestinian people is that they were able to adapt all the time, and their identity was always evolving. But that's regarding the first question. Now, regarding the second question, yeah, to explain a bit the background of that, I say when we are under occupation, there are certain questions that keep popping up. One of the questions I mentioned is, God, where are you? Wainak ya Allah? That's the important question in the Bible. Another important question, if you are under occupation, is how can we be liberated? And there are always different answers to this question. What is the way to liberation? One answer was always, armed resistance. And I take the time of Jesus as an example just to clarify this. So at the time of Jesus, there was a small group called the Zealots. They said, we cannot defeat the Romans, but with arms. And they were called the Zealots. And as you know, one of Jesus' disciples belonged to the Zealots. And, in Palestine, there are groups who were calling for armed resistance. This is always one answer, but it's not the only answer. Another answer that we had always was also, we are not capable of defeating the occupier. Why? Because we do not follow God's commandments. So the problem is in us. And so these people take religion as the way for liberation, because they really don't want, they cannot show victory over the occupier, but they can show their power by how women dresses on the street. Okay, and this is their way. It's not their way to defeat. It's at the end of the day, it's a political program, but the political program has religious connotation, and so they want all the time for the people to feel they are not religiously enough, and you have to be more and more. And in the Bible, these were the Pharisees. They said, we cannot defeat the Romans unless we all follow the commandments of God, and then the Romans will disappear just like that. It never happened. Another group, the Sadducees in the New Testament, are actually either the religious establishment or sometimes the political establishment who have somehow to cooperate with the empire, because they want to represent their people, but at the same time they have to relate to the empire, and they are always in this awkward situation. And if you look at the authority, if you look at the church hierarchy, these are in this situation. But then you have another group who say, if you cannot beat them, join them. So these are collaborators. It's a different category who actually make use of the empire for their own benefit. These were the tax collector in the New Testament. And the last group, they say, this world is hopeless, we cannot do anything, so let's retrieve. These were the Essenes who retrieved it to the desert. They didn't want to do anything. They thought it's only when the Messiah come back, the world will change. These are some free churches but also all those who immigrate because they think it's hopeless case. This land will never have peace, so let me go somewhere else. So it is in this context that I talk about Hamas being basically the Pharisees of today.
All right, looks like Nayal, you have your hand up. Did you have a question?
Yes, I want to thank you, Mr. Mitri Raheb, very much for this opportunity. And like you, I was actually 5 years old when I experienced 1967 when we were occupied in Palestine. But we're in two different continents now. I read some of your, I started reading your book, but I had a lot of work at the end of the semester, and I'm sorry I couldn't finish it. It's very interesting, actually. It's taken a different spin on the narrative of Palestine. One of the things that really I was going to ask you, two things, but the main thing is the Bible narrative, that your insistence on the Bible narrative, although you mentioned that there are even Israeli and Zionist narratives of Israel Finkelstein, I think, or others who actually did so many studies in archaeology and research to debunk, or they wanted to prove that there was a mass movement, let's say from Egypt to Palestine, or the Jews moved and the origin of the Jews. And of course, they didn't find anything for that. He and another colleague of his published a book. And there was also another book, I forgot the name of the book, but I think it's The Invention of Israel, which debunks and refutes the idea that the Israelis were there first. From my understanding, and I think a lot of us understand, that one of the original ideas, or that the Israelis and the Zionists started spreading, whether it is the Israeli Zionists or the Christian Zionists, that the Jews were there first, 3,000 years ago, and you have the slavery of them and going to Babylon and what have you. And a lot of the articles or the books we read when for Israelis or sometimes Christian Zionists that were coming home for the Jews. This is, coming home is a big deal. However, some of the narratives that you disagree with actually debunks this idea and theory that the Jews are coming home, because they were not there first. The narrative as a personal narrative and a religious narrative in Christianity, the way you spin it, is a great narrative. But they also have a narrative. And as an Arab Palestinian, and others also believe that this is a mythology that came out of the Zionists in order for them not only to convince the Jews of Europe, the Jews of Russia, but also the Christian fundamentalists and the Christians of Europe and the Christians of the United States and others to support them in coming to this mythological home. This was crucial to them to establish their state. But I feel that if we look at archaeology, if we look at scientific archaeology, and the latest is actually the Iraqi archaeologist Khaz'al al-Majidi. Khaz'al al-Majidi, who did a lot of research in archaeology to prove the mythology of coming back home. I think this, in my opinion, needs to be added to our narrative. I agree with you 100%. When I first came into the United States and went to college, my professor told me, I feel sorry for you Palestinians. The problem is you did not have a good of a narrative as that of the Israelis, and therefore we lost. We lost then, but I think we can always come up with the narrative to support the real story that the Israelis came from outside. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nail. I think it's, you know, it's a difficult question. It's not an easy question. I said how this narrative was weaponized for political ends by Ben-Gurion and others, definitely. And so we are facing a battle over narrative. The problem for us Palestinians is that for a long time, we left this narrative because we were not equipped even to deal with it. What Finkelstein and others wrote a few years ago is something that I learned 50 years ago. Nothing new, but as Israeli came up with this, because all Israeli archaeologists were actually part of the establishment that was interested in creating this narrative for political ends. So Aharoni, for example, he was with Ben-Gurion, the main archaeologist. Many of the Israeli politicians were archaeologists, and they were digging actually to prove this story. But you are right, it's not. In fact, today most of the theologians think that, you know, what we call the Israelites in the Bible actually were nothing but Canaanites, but their identity changed, and their identity became so they saw themselves as distinct from the Canaanite, but actually they were Canaanites. This is right now, this is, I would say, the most plausible narrative or the question. But the problem is this: the problem is history is his story. It's unfortunately the empire that writes the story and becomes history. And the empire has the media capability to spread that story. And this is what happened. The problem is, as Palestinians, we didn't develop the narrative. And secondly, we didn't have the machine to spread the narrative. And this is why we lost not only the land, but the narrative. And I think my book was the first time to try to come up with a genuine Palestinian narrative that is not imported from the West. Because if you look at all what we have written, you know, before, myself and all others, you know, we were trying to use, you know, ideas that the West has developed to make our story, but not to use our own experience. This is why the story of George is for me so important, because I'm using Palestinian experience actually to rewrite. And the good thing is it's working. I mean, this book, you know, people at Harvard, at Princeton, Yale, you name it, you know, on daily basis, I have here groups coming from universities in the States and so on, seminaries, and Europe, you know, they want to hear more about it. And stay tuned for my next book that will come out next year, that is even more dangerous.
Mitri, thank you so much for your presentation, and I hope to be in Bethlehem this Christmas. We were not able to come last year because it was locked out, but I was the former dean of St. George's College in Jerusalem.
Okay.
And thank you so much for what you've said. And could you give me the name of your book, please? I haven't read it.
It's Faith in the Face of Empire, the Bible through Palestinian eyes.
Thank you.
Niall, you still have your hand up, but did you have another question or you just not take it down? Sorry.
I didn't take it down, and I mean, if nobody has any comments, I'd like to make a comment.
I don't currently have other hands up or in the chat. Remember, if you
Okay.
can't talk, you can put it in the chat.
Okay. Muhyiddin asked the question about Hamas. My question and my suggestion really that as Palestinians, we start having an open interfaith dialogue between Muslims and Christians, Palestinian Muslims, Palestinian Christians, whether it's from the side of Hamas or whether it's from any other side. I think there is a lot of misconception about the others, about whether who was raised as a Muslim, for example, I did have, although I grew up in Jerusalem, quite a bit of misconceptions about my fellow Christians. And I think with Hamas, I don't think it's a monolithist organization in terms of whether they look at the woman's veil or not. I think there is quite a bit of them who are well educated to understand what resistance is. Also, some other Muslims from other, they don't belong to Hamas or so, who also would like to have. I haven't really seen, I mean, I'm here in the United States and I go every few years and visit Palestine. But I haven't really seen much. I know there are many activists on both sides, but is there any issues with having dialogue, interfaith dialogue between local Palestinian Christians and Muslims? That's my question to Mitri Raheb, please.
In 1982, in Bethlehem, a new institution was created for interfaith dialogue between Christians and Muslims called Al-Liqa. And I was a member in that for a long time. I was editor of the magazine that we brought out, etc. But I tell you, with time, I got bored with all this interfaith. It became boring because we were stuck with the same people who became expert on interfaith. But I felt somehow people on the streets are not moved by it. And so I personally changed my strategy to a dialogue of life, which is totally different, where I don't need, to explain my faith, and the other will explain his faith, and so on. But when I see, for example, our students at our university, Christians and Muslims, working together on a film, for example, on a social issue, that is for me much more interesting than that traditional interfaith route. So I know other people still are doing that, but for me, it lost somehow its meaning. I feel, I'm a pastor, right? But I always say that in this region, not only Palestine, but in the whole Arab world, we have too much religion. We have so much religion that God himself keeps saying, give me a break. I cannot handle that much religion. You know? So as pastor, I find myself in the awkward role. I call people to have less religion and not everything to overload with religion because we have too much of it. And unfortunately, we have often the wrong approach to it. And so, but I come back to the same question. Religion can be a source for innovation and liberation, and this is what I'm interested in. Or it could be the most boring and oppressive thing that you have. And so what do you choose, you know? That is really a very important question. And I see it, for example, with the woman question. This is why the woman question is for me so important, you know. Since 16 years, we are trying to pass a law to protect families from violence. And we are not talking about women, we are talking about families. These are children, can be old people, it could be women. And we face opposition from the religious spectrum. And for me, religion here becomes a source for oppression. And for me, my understanding of religion, and this is why this book is important, because if the Bible is a book of liberation, it's not only a liberation of occupation, but liberation of all forms of oppression, including the oppression of women in a patriarchal society. And if you talk about this in the traditional interfaith, you becomes a persona non grata. Nobody wants to talk to you. You know, I had a discussion with faculty, religious faculty in An-Najah University on this issue. And they know what they said. They say, you are so radical. It's very difficult to talk to you. But what we need is a radical faith for liberation, not for oppression. And this is what I'm interested in. I'm not interested, I call this other interfaith, you know, we kept massaging each other, you know, so that everyone felt good about himself. Oh, we are so great. Our religion is the greatest. And they were saying, oh, in Islam, everything is so happy and so nice. And they said, no, I mean, we have so much mess in Christianity and in Islam and Judaism. We need to face that. It's not everything is so nice and, you know, we say hallelujah and that's it. It's not. So we need to deal with the real issues that really are for liberating our people in all aspects, not only political aspects. So that is my approach.
So what hope is there for Palestine? That is, reports indicate that the two major parties, Fatah and Hamas, are very much rejected by the people, by the majority of the people. That is, what you see there on the ground as a basis for optimism, hope, are new. That is, we hear about, you know, some younger people are trying to, you know, to establish a new approach. So if you would update us about what do the people say and want?
Okay, this is a good question, maybe a concluding question. Always hope. Every chapter in my books ends with hope. So am I optimistic? Not at all. unfortunately, we are going through a very difficult time. I mean, the geopolitics internationally is right now, unfortunately, not in our favor. The regional geopolitics, unfortunately, is not our favor. And then on top of that, you have the intra-Palestinian situation that is not in our favor. I like always to tell people there is a difference between optimism and hope. Optimism is to believe that tomorrow is going to be better. I don't see that. Hope has nothing to do with optimism. At least this is my understanding of the Bible as well. Hope is not what we see. Hope is what we do. And I tell you, and I would like to really to end with this image. You know, if you look at Jerusalem, people thought that the Palestinian community in Jerusalem has surrendered. They are politically not that active. Then came Sheikh Jarrah, and you saw people rising up. I saw the people who went to the street after the killing of Shireen in Jerusalem. These are people never in their life went into a march or demonstration, but they were there. But this is what I said, when you think it's over, and this is, I think, our story as Palestinian, when the disciples after the cross thought it's over, they were depressed, defeated. Suddenly, they went out to proclaim that the crucified is resurrected. And this is exactly what I saw happening in Jerusalem. It's, you know, it's all of these people that suddenly came from nowhere. And I tell you, if Fatah or Hamas told them to go out on the streets, they would not have gone out. It's something, you know, spontaneous. It's exactly like the first Intifada. Nobody thought that the first Intifada, you know, would erupt that time. But our people, every time you think, you know, they are defeated, it's so difficult situation, they rise up. Not by remote control, but by this spirit that I think is in our DNA almost. And this is why I think, and I would like to end with this, I think the Israelis are in deep trouble because the settler colonial project is not functioning. What worked in 48 is not working anymore today. It didn't work in 67, it didn't work now, and will not work on the future. They will be facing all the time, you know, this spirit that keeps rising out of the ashes, out of the destruction, out of the defeat, and they will never be able to crush the spirit of our people. I'm not here, I'm talking really about data. I'm not talking about emotions, you know, because I'm Palestinian. This is what the data shows, that people keep rising up at a moment when nobody thinks it is possible. And for me, that is the story of Jesus, and that's the story of the resurrection, and that's the story of Palestine.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you so much. And in the end of the book, it's the story of Jeremiah, right? I really liked that little bit at the end about how he's in prison and Jerusalem's burned down. He's like, I'll buy that land. I'm going to be here. That was really great. I love that. And we appreciate so much for you being here, Mitri, and for presenting to us and to really answering our questions. We didn't get to them all, but it was just really wonderful to have you here and to get everybody here. And so let's keep reading books and keep, you know, working our minds around these things and building hope, right? Building
Yes.
hope. Thank you so much.
Thank you for what you preach, for what you write, for what you do, and
Exactly. Right on.
Thank you. And thank you,
Yeah.
all of you, for what you do, for your struggle for justice in the States, as well as justice in Palestine. We really appreciate that. We need more people like you.
Yeah.
you.
Oh, and I was going to ask, do you know the title of your new book yet?
Yeah,
What's
The
the title
working-
of the new book?
the working title, Decolonizing Palestine.
Ah, very good. Excellent. We'll look for it. All right. Thank you, everyone.
All
Yeah.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
so
All right,
much.
Take
bye-bye.
care, everybody.
Say hello to Miguel.
Thank you. All right. I guess I can stop the recording now. Okay.